Hello to all my subscribers and all my Luna lovers. I have got a video for you today on how to make the dungarees for Luna or for Freddie. So this is my Luna here with sporting her very lovely dungarees with their patch pockets on the back, the straps, front pocket here with the pencil, little pencil pocket on the side there. And I had a request from Pauline Stewart, one of my subscribers, who was struggling with the dungarees, and so I thought that I would do a little video primarily for Pauline, but also for anybody else that this will help. So these are the dungarees. Let me just give you a bit of a close-up. We've got press studs on the shoulder straps and underneath the buttons, decorative buttons on the side. We've got the top stitching down the side here. We've got the pockets, excuse little bits of thread, hot off the machine. The little pockets here that are functional, that work. I haven't left a hole for her tail. That's something I might do on a future one, if I make a future one. And also I would suggest possibly elongating the straps slightly, just to give you a bit more working room with those. So I would suggest on the strap piece you extend it by at least an inch when you're cutting that out. So that would be my suggestion, because these do feel a little bit tight on Luna's shoulders, but obviously it's up to you. But that would be my suggestion. The legs are nice and long, but obviously they do ride up a bit when she sits down. So, Luna's got ballet slippers on at the moment. Just be aware of that. If your Luna's going to be sitting down permanently, you may choose to add a little bit more length, just because some room is taken up when she actually sits down in these. So that's just a couple of tips that I've got for if you want to make these for yourself, for your Luna. But anyway, I'll shush. You know, I like to talk a lot. I'll shush and I will let you watch the video. Just to say, for anybody who hasn't watched any of my videos before, I am quite wordy, so apologies if that's not your thing. Put me on fast forward. I don't mind at all, as long as you can see what I'm doing. And obviously if you're a more experienced stitcher, then you may well be able to just watch the video without much soundtrack and race through it. So in the settings underneath the picture, I think it's towards the right hand side, there's a little cog. If you press on that and it goes up, it says Playback Speed, and so you can click on there whether you want 1.25, 1.5, 2, whatever you want it to be. As I say, fast forward through the bits that aren't of interest, but hopefully there will be, for beginners and for more intermediate sewers, there'll be some tips there hopefully that you'll find useful, and hopefully you will end up with a lovely pair of dungarees for your Luna as well. So these have been made in a chambray, but you could make them in a floral fabric if you wanted to. You could cut them off and make them shorter so they're into like shorts. The steps are the same as well. And also if you're hand stitching yours, again, just follow the steps, and just wherever I use my machine, just do it by hand. That's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all, and it just depends on what you've got available to you. So hopefully you'll enjoy watching me stitch along with these. I've tried to be as clear as I can do, and I'll stop waffling and get on with it. So here you are, folks. Have a great day. Thank you for watching. Okay, so it's time to get started and to make our overalls for Freddie. And these are the ones that we're going to be making here. It's not a very clear picture on that page. Let me get to the right page and we'll have a look here. There's a better picture of Freddie's dungarees in there. Okay, and so what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to trace off our pattern. So we're going to find the pattern in the back of the book. Freddie's dungarees, here we go. So this is the main pattern piece that we need to trace off. So what I'm going to do is set to, I've got my tracing paper, I've got a pen so that everybody can see it, and I've got some paper scissors as well. So we're going to just trace this off and then cut this out. So for those of you that have already seen my video on tracing, I'll speed this part up for you because you don't need to see this. Make sure you anchor down and give yourself a couple of reference points for your tracing first. So I've just traced around the edge of the edge of the dungarees, just 2 little lines, because then now I can just, if that shifts off, I will see that it's shifted and twisted, and if I have to take my paper off like I have just done to show you, then I can match that up. So let me just trace over here as neatly as possible. Mark on any notches that you see because we will be needing those. You can even out your lines when you're cutting out, but just try to be as even as possible, because that will affect how your finished garment comes out. Remember what I've said before as well, that if you are off by a couple of millimetres on each seam, you will risk your dungarees or whatever garment you're making for your character not fit. Even a couple of millimetres on each of the seams will make one size difference. In dressmaking, that can be all the difference there is between a couple of different sizes. So that's got most of the dungarees. If we want to trace the pocket placement, just do that now. And because we scan over the edge of the page, what I've done is I've just done a little line in at the end of the page where that started, so that I know that that line there is exactly where to join and to start my next piece. So I can line those two marks up with the very end of the pattern piece, and then I can carry on with confidence that I've got that lined up. Just make sure you're lined up as you change over to the other side. Can use a ruler when you're tracing as well. I'm fairly comfortable freehanding this, the seams and hems. But whatever works for you. This is your project, remember. Just dash these down, carry down. So I'm just marking the pleat. I don't mark the stitching lines around the outside because I know that it's roughly 1/4 of an inch, so I'm going to leave it at that. So that's one piece. Let me see if we can find the other pieces. Yep, so we need the pieces on the other side. So we've got a pocket here. Pocket here. Forget to write inside your pattern pieces what each piece is, because it doesn't matter too much why you're just making one item, but once you go on to doing 2 or 3 items, you might actually not remember which piece it is. So just go on. It only has to be scribbled on, it doesn't really matter too much when you want to do this yoke as well. Reference points in first so that we know that we're going to be straight if we go up. The notches help us line everything up when we're actually putting this fabric jigsaw puzzle together. So they are important. They're the little triangles that you see that are shaded in. So just mark those onto your pattern pieces. Let me have what else we need. Should be some straps somewhere. Freddie's Dungarees, here we go. Here's the straps. I can just fit that in. So I do try to make the best use of my tracing paper, and I save offcuts that are reasonably sized, because they do work out great just for the little pieces. Is cut 2, the yoke is cut 2, pocket is cut 2 for the triangular one, and for the front one is cut 1. Okay, so that's it for tracing off. So the next thing that we're going to do then is look to our fabric. So let's put the cut weight, just roughly on these pattern pieces. I do just roughly cut them out just to start them off. So that just helps on pattern placement, just to make sure that we've got enough fabric. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5 pattern pieces you need for making Freddie's dungarees, so make sure you've got all of those. Tissue paper to one side, pattern pieces to one side. Now, put this fabric on top because I think this is what I'm going to use. So it looks a bit denim-like. I think it'll be quite good for unisex. It'll be either for a girl Luna or for a boy Luna, or just a gender-neutral Luna. Denim's always a good option. That's like a chambray. But also, there's some other fabrics as well. I could have used this quilting cotton as well in this plain blue. Could have made some zingy ones in this circular fabric. Just depends what you want to have, really. Also got some boats here. So again, you can theme your fabrics. You want something that's quite nice to handle, I think, and you also want something that is going to be quite robust for standing up to children's play, if your Lunas are going to be played with by children. This is how I store my fat quarters and my larger pieces. I've got another one, like a few like these. And I say these are just from IKEA. So some of them, sometimes they've got a lid that stays on. If not, then I've just used a length of elastic and I just twist that round and then just put it over again. So I've chosen this chambray fabric. Put that out the way. Okay, and that's this one here. So it's an offcut from a pinafore I made for myself. And what I've done is we've got the selvage edge, which is this bound edge here, and I'm going to lay all of my pieces going upwards or downwards towards this. Make sure that if you've got a pattern on your fabric that it is not directional. That means that it only goes one way, because then you need to make sure that you get everything the right way up. Otherwise you'll have a pattern upside down on one of your legs, which is okay if that's the look you're going for, but if not, then you might not want it to be like that. The other thing is that this fabric's also been pre-washed as well. So if you are going to be making a Luna for a child and the clothes are possibly going to need to be washed, you need to pre-wash your fabric so that any shrinkage occurs before you start cutting out. So this is what we're going to use. And to just lay our pattern pieces out in the direction that we're going. So, just some general dressmaking tips here as well for when you're sewing and making your Luna's clothes. You are using the same principles really for dressmaking for yourself as well, so it's worth doing some of these tips. So, down the centre of the pattern piece for Freddie's dungarees, we've got these dotted lines for the pleats that's going to go down the side. So what I suggest you do with that is use that as a reference point, and we're going to reference point that between that and the edge of our fabric. The way that we do that is we choose which one we're going to be measuring from, and we measure from there to the edge of the selvage. So just the selvage edge is this bound edge just here on the edge of the fabric. So I can use this line here, which will make it quite precise. So if I measure from the centre of the pattern of my pattern paper pattern piece to the edge of the fabric there, that will make sure that my pattern pieces lay straight of grain. And it's not so bad for smaller pieces like this. You can skip that step if you want to, but it's a good tip to get into the habit of, because when you start to move on to doing your children's wear, then you can actually start and use this for making sure that all of that is straight of grain as well. So we're just going to measure now. So let's have a look at this one. So that's going to be 14.5. Let me just take a bit of paper off the edge here so I can see my edge a bit better. Get it closer, because I do try to make the most of my fabric if I can do. Always saves it for another project then, doesn't it? So from the edge of that pleat to there is going to be 11.5 centimetres for me. Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is just put a little pin in just along at that bottom edge, because what I can do now is I can twist my pattern slightly to get this other side straight. So we know this line's going to run straight at the side of Freddie's dungarees. So if we measure from there again, and we're slightly off, so let me just twist it slightly until the mark on my tape measure gets to 11.5, and that's there. Now I'm slightly off on my pattern piece here. So let's move it up now to 12. And sometimes a little bit of trial and error, but you're trying to get the most out of it that you can. So yes, 12's going to be fine. So, and also things can look straight and sometimes they're off slightly, and it's just these little tips that just elevate your sewing. So again, let's measure that and then twist this round to 12, and we're just in, so that's fine. I'm going to stick with that. So smooth your pattern piece down. Make sure you're pinning inside your seam allowances as well, just in case you pull a thread when you're pinning. And now that we've got both sides here of the pleat anchored straight, I'm going to go around now and just put in some other pins just to hold this piece flat. The other thing is that, as I haven't mentioned as well, is that when you're copying out your pattern, you'll see on one edge there's 2 notches, so 2 triangles that you've traced onto your pattern, and on the other side there's only 1. 2 notches point to the back of the garment, and one notch points to the front of the garment. So you know that when you're trying to put these together, especially if they're very similar, especially on sleeves sometimes can be very similar on the curves, then you know that if you've got 1 notch, then you're on the front of the garment, and if you've got 2 notches, you're on the back. So I'm just quickly pinning this on. So I pin every couple of inches or so. We want it to be nice and flat. We don't want it to be moving anywhere when we're going to be cutting out. So now we're going to do the same with the yoke. So I'm going to drill that close to the edge, and again we've got a line that we can follow, that's the side line. So we're going to measure from there, and that's going to be 10 centimetres on mine. Might be different on yours, remember, it just depends on where you are. So 1 pin down to anchor, and then measure again. It just needs to go up slightly to make it straight, and that means that we've just got that straight again now. So again, more pins in now. Apologies if you know all of this already. If you do, just fast forward. I won't be offended. I'll never know, so it'll be fine. What I'm trying to do is just give all of those beginners who've not perhaps done dressmaking before, or who are self-taught, a few extra tips just to elevate what you're making, to make you really proud of the garments that you are making. And actually this pattern is very similar to some dungarees I made for my granddaughter Clementine. I'll probably pop a picture in for you so that you can see those. And if anybody would like to, I could always do a video on how to make the dungarees for Clementine as well if you want. It's similar. And one of the things that I've said before I want to do is put together a series of videos on how to, oh, I can come over here, can't it? On how to, think of what you're saying, Claire. Concentrate. How to make children's clothes, because these patterns from Cool Crafting are exactly the same as making patterns for young children anyway, or even for yourself. A lot of the principles are the same. So we'll still do this measuring the same as we would do normally with our own patterns, so this bit won't change. And actually some of the construction as well, like making the straps and attaching the yoke, that is all the same as well. So again, just make sure everything's all square. Make sure as well that you've got enough on the top of your fabric as well, that your lines are straight. I'm just pinning this down, ready for cutting out. Now this pocket we only need 1 of, so we can just pop that on the end there, look, and that will just fit in there. And then this we're going to just put down the side here, because we've got a straight bit there. Anyway, now it does say to cut 1 on the straps, but I think you're going to need 2. So let me just look at the instructions just quickly. And I know that on the Cool Crafting website they do publish an erratum page. So if that's the case, you'll need to just check there and to see. No, so you do only need 1, because you're going to actually cut that in half once you finish. So she is right. Well, I should have guessed that, shouldn't I, really? Trim off the excess paper that we left on for the time being. And that can just sit on the edge there. So, again, let's measure. We're always going to measure to a fixed point. This point here I've already cut, so that's not a good reference place for me. So that there is 30 to the edge of there, making sure it's not going to go off the edge. Put a piece in the end, little pin in the end there. If your pins overrun your pattern pieces, just make sure that you don't cut through them. It doesn't work. This last piece here, we're going to just cut one. So if I just fold that back, you can measure again, make sure it's all lined up. Let's go up to 35 for that piece. Yeah, I've got room. And the other side of your straight line. Yeah, that's nice and straight, so you can anchor that one down as well now. So the next thing then is to cut all of your pieces out and to have those together. So let's just check we've got everything. Should have 5 pattern pieces. Okay, so cut 2, cut 2, cut 2, cut 1, cut 1. So I'm ready to go. So now let's just keep our hands flat, scissors straight, flat to the ground, to the work surface, and we're going to take off the little bit of the edge. We're cutting on the line of the pattern. This is the complete whole line. And remember, if we cut this bigger now, and then we do the same seam allowances as our dungarees, when we actually come to sew this up, it'll be a different size and it needs to fit in perfectly. So make sure you're cutting on your line for all of your pieces. If like this one, it's a little bit difficult to cut out completely, just cut it across, detach it from your main piece, and then you can just trim it up. And you'll find that a lot easier to work with. You can work with a rotary cutter if you like, and a mat, a self-healing mat. Just make sure that you don't just go straight off with your rotary cutter, because you can take off a bit more than you intended to if you go a little bit gung-ho with it. So just take your time and you should be okay. Okay, so that's one piece done. Tidy up as we go along. These little offcuts you can save for practicing to make sure that you've got your stitches all together, and the stitches are correct for the fabric that you're using and that they're going to lie nice and straight. We don't want any puckering on the stitching hems that we do on our seams. Just be aware of any of the little curves that we've got. And here's our one notch edge, so we automatically know that's our clue that this is the front edge of the dungarees. That's from the centre front. And then down this other side here, which is the centre back, because it's got the 2 notches on it. Okay, so we've got 2 notches here for the centre back and 1 notch here for the centre front, so we know that. So that's that piece cut out. Last double piece to cut out is this little pocket. And I'll give you some tips of how to get a pocket that fits really nicely and has got no raw edges on it. That's that piece. Let's go on to our single pieces now. And just detach this from the main piece, and then that'll make it easier for me to cut out. Put this lot away. I do save all of my offcuts as well. Some of them are too small, I just use for testing my stitches on. But yeah, some of the bits have come in very handy sometimes. Sometimes you just need a small accent piece of fabric, especially on these small little doll's clothes, and a little piece can come in very handy. Or you can use them for a applique as well. So I do use them for that as well. So just move this pin out of the way, because that's going across the strap and the pin is longer than the strap, to make sure I don't damage the blades on my scissors. So again, we're being as precise as we can be. Excuse the sound of the washing machine in the background. Real life continues on even in YouTube world. Okay, all done for those. The next thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to find my little snips and we're going to mark our notches. So here's our snips, little scissors basically, but with sharp points on the edges. And all I'm going to do is, like on here on the pocket, we've got a little notch here and a little notch there, little triangles. So I just marked those through a few of the threads, just with a little snip. See if you can see on the back there, just a little snip, look, just by that pin. And what that does is it just marks that fold line for me. So I know that if I've got that notch and that notch on my fold, then my pocket's going to fold across to the correct size. So that's what I've done on there. There's no notches on the strap. There's notches on the east side of this pocket too, so I'm just going to notch that off. A notch on the side of the dungarees, top and bottom. And then on the dungarees here, we've got the little pleat marked on the sides there. And then we've got our centre front and centre back marked. So again, just going to do a little, and I just do a little cut just down into the middle of each of the triangles. And that will then just sort through. I don't cut them out, I just put the notch in the front, in the middle of them, that's where we're working to. So the next thing I'm going to do now is just thread trace with a tailor's tack the position of the pocket, because that will then help me, because if you hold your pocket up, at the moment it's too big for the placement, because that allows for the seam allowance when we're preparing it. But if I do a tailor's tack at each of those 3 points, that will actually tell me that I am in the right place. The other thing I'm going to do is do a couple of tailor's tacks just down this pleat here, because when I fold it, that'll confirm to me that I'm in the right place. Okay. Just take off a length of thread. I've just chosen this bright pink. Hopefully this will show up on the camera for you. Just going to thread my needle. So I have my thread double with the ends equal at the end. Oops. Right, and what we're going to do now is, just at this point of this pocket here, I'm going to put my thread in, needle in, and take it out again. And I'm going through both pieces of my fabric, leave a long tail. I then go at right angles to it, making sure that I'm going through both pieces of fabric, and I do another stitch. But again, I'm leaving a long tail on here, and you can't see because my thread's knotted. And then what you do is you snip it off, leaving a long tail, so you have this fluffy bit. Oops. And then what we do is we just snip through the loops that we left. So we've got these long tails. We do that again for you. So my thread is double and my ends are even. On my pattern piece, I'm going to go up this side one and go through both pieces of my fabric. See the needle at the back there? Pull it through, but leave a tail. Tail's about at least an inch, maybe an inch and a half long. It depends how long you want it to be, how long you're up with. And then I'm going at right angles to that stitch, right on the corner of that pocket, and I'm pulling my thread through to leave a loop, which we've got just here. So we've got our 2 threads and a loop. I then snip off my needle and thread, leaving a tail, and I snip through the loop. And I'm doing 3 on this pocket, 2 there, and then 1 just here at the bottom of the point, because those 3 will help us position this pocket in the right place. So again, another little tailor's tack through there, leave a loop and a tail, cut through the loop, cut off the needle and thread. Now, the magic happens when we actually take our pattern piece off, because if we take our pins out of the top half of this pattern for now, then what I can show you is that when we lift this pattern piece off, the pattern piece, because we've cut through those loops, will lift off, and if you just keep your thumb on the threads, it'll just take those pieces, the pattern piece will come off and leave the threads in your fabric. So we've now got a reference point now for where these 3 points are. I can't see it very well there, but there's one there, and one there. But that's going through double fabric. So the next stage we need to do then is we gently ease apart the 2 pattern pieces, the piece of fabric. Now you want to leave some on the top of your fabric, but leave enough in the middle here that you can just snip through with your snips without cutting through your fabric. And again, pull them slightly apart and snip through. Remember, you've got 3 here. Don't go gung-ho and just pull it straight off, and that leaves another little thread. So if I show you now, here we've got a mark, and a mark here. And on this one, we've got a mark, and a mark on this one too. The only other thing that I'm going to do with this fabric is, because it's the same front and back, is I am going to choose that I had my right sides together. So I'm just going to leave a pin in the centre of my dungarees on each of the right sides, because what we need to make sure is that we've got 2 mirrored copies. We don't want, so if you look at this pattern piece now, we've got a taller piece here and a thinner piece at the back here. We don't want 2 like this, where we've got the 2 this side when we're doing our pleat down the middle. We need to have a left and a right, and that's how we make sure. We can also make sure, because of the snip that we've got here, we've got 2 snips there, and we've got 2 snips there, so we know that that point is a match point when we put these together. So just make sure that if you're using a solid colour, that you mark which is your top and which is your bottom, because on most pieces, because you will end up otherwise with 2 left and 2 right, and sometimes they can look very similar. So what I'm going to do now is I am just going to put my pattern piece back on here again, because I forgot to mark the tailor's tacks on my pleat just there. If I turn that one over that way, that can make sure that we've got mirrored copies. So line these up perfectly. And get a length of thread. Oops, doesn't want to come undone. So preparation is key on some of these things. Make sure that your fabric is ironed as well, so that you're not cutting out on any ironed creases that might have been there. I've already said about pre-washing your fabric as well, so just make sure you do that as well. Put those pattern pieces, pins in just so that it keeps it straight. And I've told you about marking your front and your back piece, making sure that you have got a left and a right. Some pieces, like the straps, don't have a left and a right, but on the front and the back of a dungaree, then they do. So again, there's one little, that'll just make sure that when we're going through our pleat, we just have got that centre point, because it's quite long. You can also do thread tracing, which is what my friend Lindsay does very expertly, and there is a video on my channel that just shows you how to thread trace. Well, I'll leave it to go and have a look at that. It is called thread tracing, so you'll be able to find it. So let's take those pins out, gently lift off our pattern piece so that we don't pull out any threads, and then we're going to snip through again like we did before. So just go through to where we're just pulling it apart, snip through the pieces, make sure we don't go through our fabric, and that has just marked the centre of each of our pleats. So we can make sure that when we go through them, we're going to make sure that the snips at the bottom here, where we've got our snips at the bottom, one there and one there, are just going to then match up. So there we go, folks. Do that with all of your pattern pieces. Anything you want to mark, we've done the snips on here, so that's fine. There are no other tailor's tacks I think that I need to make, so that would just be those 5. Only takes a few minutes, and definitely it'll help you as you move along to make sure that that's ready. So you want to get yourself to this stage, and then we'll come back and we'll look at starting to sew. So here we've got the two main pieces now of our dungarees, and what I want you to do is identify which is the thicker piece of your strap fabric and which is the thinner piece, because this is going to denote which is the front and the back. The other thing that you can do is look at your notches as well, okay? So the thicker piece is the front and the thinner piece is the back. It's got the two notches here, and I've just marked those two notches with tailor's tacks because I've overlocked the edges. And what I want you to do is I want you to take your snip edge on the bottom of this. So if you just orientate yourself, so this is the top and this is the hem of the bottom. This is where it goes between your character's legs, Freddie's legs. And on the tailor's tack or the notch closest to the widest part of the strap, I want you to fold your fabric in half. Now on here, this is where our placement is going to be useful for our tailor's tack here, because we can use that to mark everything up. So let me just get my pins. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to put a pin in at right angles on that tailor's tack, so that's just on the fold, and again down the bottom here so that it's just on the fold. I'm not worrying about the other notch at the moment. Just be careful if you have marked your notches with iron removable pen, because you might need to just be aware of that. Again on this side, so we're going to mark them both the same at the same time. So again here we've got the thicker strap here, and this first notch closest to that thicker strap we're again going to fold on the half. Okay, so mark that there with a pin, and these pins are just going to keep it in place, that in place whilst we take it to the ironing board. And what I want you to do now is just iron that crease in place. So just use your iron and just press it down on each of those edges. So let me just do that and I'll pop back to you. Okay, so I'm going to take these pins out. So now if I open up this leg, you can see we've got a nice pressed crease down that edge there. What I want you to do now is folding it towards the thinner strap. So we're going to be folding the thicker strap towards the thinner strap on this fold line here, is just match up those points on the edge of those trousers. So again, we've got our tailor tacks here so we can see. It's only about 1/4 inch pleat. If you were making a top, it would be called a pin tuck. This would, just a small amount. And then when we're sure we've got it in the right place, we can just fold that together. You can thread trace these if you want to. I don't think there's any need to really. I think just halfway as a point is a good way, but it's up to you, whatever you feel comfortable with. And what this is going to do, it's giving us a faux seam line down the side of the trousers that mimics like a jeans kind of seam. So there we go. I've just pinned mine. You can see it's only about 1/4 inch, that little tuck is. And then what I want you to do again is just press this again. Now, because we're working with the top, I'm just going to move that pin out of the way just for the moment. That's my pin marking my top and my bottom of my fabric. Or the right side and the wrong side, should I say. And I'm just going to give a little press along this seam here now. That's just going to hold everything in place whilst we top stitch. So just let me go and do that. So here we can see I've just pressed that now to hold that still. Right, let's do that again on the other side so that we've got the two together. So this is our pressed seam as it's come off the ironing board through threads. And then we're going to open this out for now. And then we're going to see where the thick strap is and where the thin one is, and we're going to fold the pleat towards the thin straps, towards here, and we're just going to match up so that the two lots of tailor's tacks are on top of each other. And it literally is just, as I say, 1/4 inch, so it's quite fiddly, but then a lot of these things on the Luna Lapin clothes are fiddly because they're so small. on a full-size garment for like a child or for yourself, you would probably have a seam here. And then that would make it a little bit easier and a little bit more to work with. But as I say, just put your pins in just as you go through. If I just show you this, so if you can see, this pleat here is folding towards the narrow edge of the seam. If we look from the other side, you can just see there's just a little pleat just in there, a little fold in the fabric. So let me just go and press this one and then we'll start stitching. Okay, so on these dungarees as well, depending on how confident you are with your stitching, then you could do a decorative top stitch if you wanted to, and that would actually be very nice. We're actually going to do, let's have a look in the book, she suggests you do 2 rows of stitching. Now you can either use a twin needle, you could use a cover stitch machine if you've got one and just do a narrow stitch just straight the way down. It's up to you, whatever equipment you've got. I've just got my sewing machine here and I think that's what most of you will have. So I'm going to use my sewing machine in order just to do that top stitching. So what I'm going to do first is just double check have a little practice, because a little practice is always good. So I've got a sample of fabric here. I'm just going to fold it in half. Made myself just a little practice of a pleat. And what I'm going to do now, I've got in white thread in this machine at the moment. And I'm going to move my needle across to the edge of my foot, because that is going to give me a line to use as a guide for while I'm stitching. So on mine it's number 2 and it moves it across. You might have a dial that moves your stitch. And what I'm going to do is line up my presser foot so that the edge of the presser foot is just about a couple of millimetres away from the pleated of the fabric. And then when I use hold on to my threads before I start, and then when I sew, my needle's going to go down just right on that edge just there. So that's going to give me my first reference line. So let's just sew that and see how we get on. I'll do it this way, opposite way to the way I normally do. So also, if you've got a speed dial, just turn your speed down as well. This isn't a time for being speedy. This is a time for being really, really super slow. So this is just using white thread at the moment as a contrast, and we'll just see if I like that or not. I could also use an orange on this denim. That would make it look very jeans-like, or you could use a colour. If you're going to make a top for your Freddie, then you can also use a different colour then to be able to see it more easily. Now, on clothing for adults or for children, I would normally increase my stitch, but for this I'm not going to, because I want it to be quite in scale. So again, there we've got our white line of stitching, and that looks quite okay to me. And we can see that by lining up with the edge of the presser foot, we've got our little edge there, which is I'm happy with, and on the back that's what it looks like. So that looks okay. So now what I'm going to do is just going to practice doing my next stitch as well. So it depends which way. You can either turn it round and then you can move your needle. So let me move my needle so it comes in a couple of mil. And then go down using this guide, this line here now on the edge of the presser foot, and that will hopefully, so all the time you're trying to line up and give yourself a reference point. Don't watch the needle, because the needle is guaranteed to go up and down in the same position. Look at your presser foot. This one's got a walking foot on it with an open toe, but see where that is and see how that's going to give you a nice line. So although we're going to be doing 2 parallel lines, let's just see, by lining this row of stitches up with the edge of the presser foot, I can hopefully get a very adequate effect of double stitching, and I'm going nice and slowly, as you can see, no time for racing. We're just going to just press that down. We're just going to keep that going now to the end. Obviously the more confident you are, the speedier you can go, but certainly when you're practicing with top stitching, if you don't want to spend time on stitching it, unpicking it at the end, then going slow is my suggestion. So there we go, we've got 2 very adequate parallel lines of stitching that we've done just with our ordinary sewing machine. And on the back we can see, I mean this is a bit bigger than the other thing, but that's anchored it down, and you can see how that would give you the effect of a seam on some jeans. So I think I'm going to go with the white for my top stitching, because I don't know what colour shirt this is going to go with this, and I also don't know whether or not it's going to be a boy or a girl's Not that that should matter really, but I don't know what colour top I'm going to put with it in order to coordinate it. So let's go to our proper piece of fabric here. We've got our tailor's tacks in. I can actually take those out if I wanted to before I sew, because I've got my reference point already. We've used it for the ironing. So they just pull out. If I'd not pressed this, I would keep those in until after I'd pressed it. But they've been pressed. Right, okay, so I'm going to do the folded edge first. So let me put my stitch back, and I'm just going to have my thread so it's just on the same. And I've done my pins slightly at an angle so I can get really close to them before I have to take them out. So again, let's just do a couple of stitches forward and back just to anchor those threads in the seam allowance, and then being very careful, just take out my pins as we go along. And I've just got my presser foot lined up with the edge of my sewing. You can see as soon as I start to go, I start to wave. Now what I would suggest you do is always finish with the needle in your work, so that you can get close to the pin. Just take it out, just make sure everything's all lined up all nicely. Just lift your presser foot and adjust it if you need to. Don't sew onto your pins or over them, it's not good for your machine. So that ironing those pleats down first is just, especially on a 100% cotton like this is, it does just hold everything in place, a nice crisp place. If you're trying to make these with a polyester or slightly bouncier fabric, you might struggle a little bit, so just bear that in mind if you're wanting to have a go. Also, have a practice if you wanted to as well. Have a little practice on a garment first. So I'm just going to turn this round, take the needle out, and then I'm going to use that line of stitching as my reference, because I always want to be apart from that, and I'm going to move my needle across slightly. Start and finish, and then down the other side. Okay, I'm just going to take the threads off, and there we can see we've got a nice neat dual stitching on there. Okay, so let's go on and do the other one, and then we'll have finished that first part. So now that we've got both of our legs top stitched, what I want you to do now is find your little triangular pocket, and we're going to we've put our little snips in the side so we know where we're working for our notches. Let's just take our pins out of this pattern piece. You can see my scruffy writing on my pattern pieces, but as long as you can read it, that's all that matters for you. Now again, what we need to do is remember that we had right sides together on this fabric. So again, just to mark that whilst we're working with them, I'm just going to put a pin down the middle of each piece, just to remind me that the pin's on the top piece of the fabric. And what we need to do now is we need to fold down, find our notch on the side here, small notches I've got there. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold down towards the back half of the seam allowance, and we're just going to give a little press on that. So I'm just going to fold that edge down towards the seam allowance, just so we've got a small edge towards the back. So right side, wrong side. I'm taking that top edge and just folding it halfway, so I'm finding where my notch is on the side. Oh, can I see it? Yes, there. And there. Note to self, when you're videoing things, make notches a little bit bigger than you would normally. Okay, so I can just finger press that at the moment, so that gives me a bit of an idea, and then I'm just going to fold that down just to make sure that it's flat. Okay, and I'm just going to take this to the ironing board, and we're just going to iron that crease in, because I think just ironing them as you go along really does just help just give you those reference points. Let me just do that. Okay, so working on two together, and then what you need to do then is to fold it back on itself. So you're going to fold this creased edge here now on that cut line that you made, and you're going to fold it towards the back again. Okay. Just put a little pin in just to hold it, either side. So this is our right side of our fabric with this white pin in, headed pin, and I've folded it again now towards the front. So let's do it again then, this one. So this is the flap that we've got. So right side of our pocket, wrong side of our pocket, and we've found our little notches on the side here, little cuts that we made in the side. And I've just folded this over and pressed it towards the wrong side. What I want to do now is fold that back again, not over itself like this, but I want to fold it back towards with the little notches on the sides, and we're folding it back over towards the front. So if I turn it round, you can see that's folding now towards the front. I'm going to put a little pin in there as well. What we wanted to do now is we're just wanting to sew down this bit just here. Now, top tip, in order that we actually have a nice edge along the edge here, I'm going to carry on my stitching all the way down here at the same seam allowance. I'm going to leave my needle in my work here and pivot while I turn that corner. I'll show you how I do that. Then down again to here, down and pivot. It's just a reference line, okay? It's not a attaching line. But what that'll do is when we come to fold these across to then make the pocket nice edges for it, it will give us a line of reference to fold along. You'll see what I mean as we go forward with this. Let's just move that pocket piece out the way. Move my machine closer so hopefully you can see. Okay, so we're going to start here, start and stop, 1/4 inch, and then we're going to come down here and then pivot. So what I'm going to do there is about 1/4 inch. Where are we? Yes. I'll just take that pin out because it's close to the edge. Okay, so I'm going to use the inside of that presser foot there as being my, let me just use my, I've got a pointy thing here somewhere. So I'm going to use the inside here of this presser foot on the edge of my fabric, and then this needle here isn't in the centre, it's over to the side here. That'll just give me a reference point to work with. So what we're going to do now is going to sew this pattern piece. So what you need to do is have your threads ready so that you can pull the piece through. So I've lined up my edge of my fabric with the edge of the presser foot here, and then we're going to go down. So now I'm going to carry on going down here. Now if this was a contrast thread, I would have changed my thread over to a coordinating thread, because we want to be able to see it, but we don't want any recipients to be able to see it. I'm going to put my needle down in my work, I'm going to lift my presser foot up, and I'm going to, with my needle anchor in my work, I'm going to just twist my work, the fabric piece, so that the presser foot now is on the outside edge, and I'm going to sew back down here. This is giving us a consistent seam allowance all the way through. Again, lift your needle in the work, lift up your presser foot, twist your pattern piece round, and then come back up the other side. And yes, I'm having to estimate. You could have marked this if you wanted to. One more stitch, I think. That's it. Lift your presser foot up, twist it round, and then down. And then we're going to carry on straight up here now, over the folded edge. Watch out for your pin, remove that as soon as you get too close to it. Once your presser foot has held on to your seam allowance, and then we're just going to go towards the edge, and then I'm just going to reverse on my machine just to hold that in place. Needle up, then I'm going to cut my threads. Now what this has given us is it's given us this reference line around the pocket. Hopefully you can see that if I point with the presser with this all. So again, a line around here, look, so that we can press. Because when we come to press this, it's going to give us a lovely, neat little edge to press that against. And we know that it's even all the way around. That will help us as a reference. So I'm going to take this pin out the centre now because we know which is the right side. The other thing I want you to do is just trim off these corners here. So you're trimming off the corner of fabric. Don't throw it all over your sewing machine like I've done. And we're trimming outside edge to outside edge, look, because we don't want that bulk in that corner. And then what we can do is fold the corner over neatly and then just turn this round the right way round. Now if you've got a little pressing tool, not a pressing tool, little seam gauge like this, it can be helpful for giving you a nice straight edge to be able to pull that seam back to. So push that out, gives a nice flat edge. And again this side here, I'm not using the pointy side because I don't want to go through my fabric. I just want to use this corner here that's just going to give us a nice edge for there. And then what I'm going to do now, so that's how we've got our little pointy edges at the top. What I'm going to do now, and we've got a nice little neat edge at the top there, look, because that's our raw edge, is just inside. I'm just going to fold over these edges like this. You can finger press it, start it off if you want, but you can see it gives you a reference line just to work to, and you'll find it easier just to press these smaller pieces. Okay, along the edge there, and then again on the edge there. So if I just finger press these with the heat of my hand and the pressure, you can see you've got a lovely neat little thing. I can see here I've not covered my stitches quite properly, so I'll make sure I do that when I iron it. And as I say, if you use a coordinating thread, not a contrast thread, you won't see these little stitches on the side here that are just giving you that access point. Access point? Reference point, that's the word I wanted. Okay, so let me just go and iron this one, and then I will do another one and show you again. Okay, so here we go, we've got a lovely little pocket there, nice and straight. So let's do the other one then, and I'll just go through this again with you, and hopefully that'll make sense. If you've already got it and you know what you're doing, fast forward. As I say, once you've got something, fast forward. I'll never know, I won't be offended, you don't have to listen to every single word, and we'll just do the other pocket at the moment. So put that one out of the way. So here's our other one that we've got. So we've got our folds in and our pins in, and we're just going to start on this edge again here. So line it up our edge of our fabric with the presser foot there, and then I'm going to come down here about 1/4 inch, this seam allowance is. Oops. So I'm trying to work the other way round to the way I normally do, so bear with me. Okay, so we're going to take a couple of stitches forward, and then because we're starting off and ending our seam, we're going to now reverse. Oops. So to help your fabric stay under your presser foot, hold on to your stitches at the end and just give a little bit of pressure, and that'll just help pull the fabric through. So a couple of stitches, make sure it's going under. If it's not, put your needle in your work, lift your presser foot up, just use something just to smooth down everything, and put your presser foot back down again. And then we're going to carry on down. So now that edge is done, I'm going to take that pin out. So carry on down. I'm going to stop about 1/4 inch from this seam. One more stitch I think. And then I'm going to leave my needle in my work, lift up my presser foot, twist it round, foot down to this side here. That'll be about enough I think. We can just try it. No, one more stitch I think. Press the foot down, one more stitch. Now press the foot up, twist it round. Now these small pieces are a little bit fiddly, so you do just have to just bear with them. It's not a day to do if you're trying to, not something to do if you're trying to rush. Okay, the other side. Now watch out for this pin here, but we can use that. Oh, can't use it that way, can we? If I use my awl here, hopefully you'll be able to see still. I'm just going to keep that out of the way. So I want that to fold over nicely. And then once we're on, a couple of stitches backwards and forwards just to anchor that point. Needle up. Cut our threads. Okay, so we can take that pin out now. We know which is the front. Now snip off the corners. Don't go through your stitches, you don't want to go past that stitching line. And we're just going to fold those bits back. So that fully encloses that top seam, so you're not going to get any fraying. Just pushing those corners out. So we've got our top edge flat now, enclosed. And now we're just going to finger press on that sewn line there, just with our fingernails. We can just do that side and then just do this side. Make sure we've got our stitches covered if we can. If not, you can always unpick those few stitches if they do show. As I say, this is where coordinating thread is your friend. Okay, and let me just take that to the iron and then I will press that. Got 2 identical pockets. Now, what Sarah Peel suggests you do at this point is that we now do some contrasting stitching like you would find on a jeans pocket normally, and she suggests you go across the top here, and that's going to hold on this bit here so that it doesn't fold back up again, so we can do that. And then she's also suggested here, you could put initials in if you wanted to, depends how fancy and how clever you are, but she suggests going across to here, and then she takes it down to this point here, and then across up to here. So let's do the same as what Sarah's done, because that's what you'll all be expecting to see. So I'm going to start by going across first here, down to the point, back up to here, and then finishing off. So let's just have a go at doing that. So let's put my needle position back into the middle. So again, I'm using my presser foot to line up where I am. Oh, where's my organ? So I've lined up the edge of the fabric here, and I've just looked at where the position of the needle is going to go through the middle here, and I'm happy with that. So let's do that, and I'm going to start and stop as I go. So again, this is going to have a tendency to jump out from under your presser foot, so hold on to your threads at the back, and that will then help you just pull that fabric straight back through underneath your presser foot. Hopefully take away some of the frustration for you. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches here and put my needle down into my work. Lift my foot up, and then I can pivot around again. And what I'm going to do is I'm aiming for a straight line directly to this point here. So I'm going to put that, aim that on my bed, and I'm just going to move this across now. So let's just keep going through. So again, take your time, look, because it's not wanting to, it's so small and a little bit floppy. To stop just at that point, and one more stitch, maybe that's better. Okay, and then we're going to go back up and aim towards this point here. If you need to draw a line, just make sure that you're using something that will come out, or you can tack a line if you want to follow. Again, take your time because that's not wanting to go through, so I'm just going to lift up my presser foot and just ease that through. Try not to be too wavy, and I'm just going to do a couple of stitches backwards just to secure that. Lift up your foot, and then cut your threads off. So we've got a pocket there, okay, a little bit off centre. I'm happy with it, I'm happy with a little bit of variation, but obviously if you're more of a professional than I am, or you want it to be absolutely straight, then go for it. So let's do this other one now. Sorry, I've got the other hand in front, haven't I, again? So a couple of stitches forward. Look how it's trying to crinkle up, needle in the work. Just lift this foot up again just to get it straight. And turn a reverse on mine. Just anchor those stitches. Just get it lined straight and hold on to my thread so I can help ease it through to the other side. A little bit of pressure on the threads just helps it go through. That looks about equal with the other one, so we're trying to get these two pockets equal if we can do. Again, not a time for zooming on your sewing. Twist it round again, just pivot. A little bit more maybe, that's it. And then slowly when you start, just to make sure your feed dogs have got it. Walking foot is really useful on these little tiny pieces because it does grip quite nicely. And then a couple of stitches backwards and forwards just to anchor that. Okay, and we'll take these off now. Okay, so we have two pockets. Pretty even. They'll do, won't they? I think. So the next stage then that we want to do is we want to position these onto the back of our trousers. Let me just move my sewing machine. Tidy up a little bit. I can remove these pins now because I know which is the top of my fabric, and also all the time I'm just checking to make sure that I've got two mirrored pieces. I've got a left and a right, so I've got my when my two pieces are facing on top of me, I've got a thick strap here and I've got a thick strap here. I've not got a thick strap there and there together. We want to have two mirrored pieces like this so they're opposites. And also we can see that on this back seam here where I've got my two notches and my two little tailor's tacks marking where my notches are, because I've obviously overlocked, so therefore I've lost my notches. I can see that I have got, if I take that piece of thread off, I have still got here 1, 2, 3 pattern placements for my pockets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up this corner here of that pocket with that little tailor tack, and I'm going to put a pin in holding that into place like that. I've then got my other bottom piece, my other one just there. Let's just move it across slightly because I think my pocket has turned out slightly smaller than where the markings are, but that's fine because I know they'll both be the same. Another pin it in over this side, so those two edges there are on the same line. As long as they're on the same line as that point, that's fine. And then the point down the bottom here is just in line here. So again, I'm putting the heads of my pin into the centre of my pocket. So I'm just anchoring that pocket down. Hopefully this is all making sense to you. So I've got a point matched to a tailor's tack, a point matched to a tailor's tack, and this point matched to the tailor's tack. That'll make sure they're sitting straight. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew along here, attaching this pocket along here. Same as we did when we were doing the other with the stitching on the side, but this time we are going to go through both pieces and attach those on and keeping it nice and neat. So let's just get the other one lined up. So here's our other pocket piece and our other pocket. So we're looking for the 3 triangular pattern markings with our tailor's tacks. I'm putting my pattern piece in the middle, and then a pin to anchor, and I put the heads of the pin into the centre of the pocket so they don't get in the way of the presser foot. And we're not going to sew across this top bit here because we want the pocket to open, don't forget, so we're just going to sew down these other edges like you would with a pair of jeans pocket, and make sure that that point there is not quite pointing towards that. Is pointing down towards our our bit at the bottom. Use as many pins as you need. You can always tack this on as well if you want to, if you're not comfortable at sewing close to pins. I am, but if you're not, just take a few seconds and just tack that in place, and that will then make that work and stay in place for you. So let's get my machine. Try and keep my fingers out the way for you. So I'm going to start here and sew down here and across the bottom, across this side here, and then up to the top here. Again, I'm going to keep my threads in line with my hands so that I can actually pull on those if I need to just help this through. Now that corner is in place, I'm going to take out the pin that's holding that corner in place, but I've got to be careful that it doesn't start to ruck up. So a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back to hold that in place, and now I'm just going to go along and I'm just measuring where my needle is falling on the edge of that pocket. When I get to the bottom here, I'm going to put my needle in my work, lift up the foot and twist round. Now I can take that pin out because we've done down that side now, and we're going to go across to the point, so this down again. Again, just try and keep it even if you can, and you're trying to finish on the point of that top stitching that we did before, and twist. Sometimes consistency is the difficult bit when you're making something like this, because you know it's going to be seen. So just try and keep your seam allowances equal and the same all the way around if you can. coming up to here, I'm going to take that pin out so it doesn't cause a problem. And I'm aiming to finish in that stitch in the corner. I'm just going to do a couple of stitches forward and back. And then I'm going to lift my needle up and take this work out. So let's cut our threads. So what you can do here, if you want to make it super neat, is where you've started and where you've stopped. If you pull on the thread from underneath, oh, if I can get it, quite often it'll pull up a little bit for you, and you can catch it with a quick unpick. And you're just using the point. You're not trying to break the thread. You're just trying to make a loop like that from the stitch where it went over the other thread, and by pulling on it gently, you actually pull it through to the other side. So rather than snipping it off and leaving a short end, because then what you can do is you can just knot these threads together. 3 is good, quite tight. And then snip that off, and that then shouldn't come undone. So let's do that again here. So we're going to find our thread on the reverse, not that one, this one. We're just going to give it a little tug, and quite often it'll pull up the other corresponding loop. This one's not going to cooperate for me. Nope, that one's not going to cooperate. So if that's the case, so we did one that had one that cooperated, one that didn't. Just take your needle and thread it. And then just where your stitches are, just push your needle through the same place and take it through to the back. You can then just use that just to thread this off, tie this off. Okay, and just snip those threads off. That should anchor that down. So we can see on the inside, you can see the lines that I've done of the stitching here, hopefully with the white. We can see we were close enough to our tailor's tacks, and from here we can just pull those out now because they've served their purpose. Tidying the work up as we're going along. Just take those out. If you get one that's stuck, snip it off on one side close to your work. Make sure you don't snip your work. It's just got caught in the threads, and then on the other side that should just pull straight out. Yeah, there we go. Again, these ones should all be okay. Just pull those out. And this one here, I'm leaving in the tailor's tacks I've got here, which are marking my notches on the back piece for me. So I'm taking those out, that little bit out, but leaving those ones in. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead now and sew the other pocket on the back, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so now we've got our 2 pockets sewn on nice and neatly. What we're going to do now is we're going to work on the hems of these trousers. So I'm just going to take off these edges where I've overlocked mine. You may or may not have overlocked yours. You might have zigzagged them instead or just pinked the edges. Doesn't matter too much. But what that does give me is a nice guide for ironing. So what I'm going to do now is going to turn my piece over, and I'm going to iron right on the edge of that top stitch bit there. The top stitch overlocked bit just there. And then I'm going to then fold it over again, because it asks for it to be folded over double, so you might not have needed to have overlocked this edge, but it does give you a nice reference point to work with. And we're just going to press that in place to give us a nice little edge. Again, we're going to top stitch this. So quite a lot of top stitching on these dungarees, but it's a nice skill to learn. So I'm just going to iron this first. Again, iron it first because that will give you, sorry, I've got threads everywhere. It will give you a reference point, and it'll make your fabric sit so much flatter. It makes it just so much easier. So I'll just go and iron this down, and then you'll see. So if I just show you this is the one that I've just ironed. As you can see, that's going to sit nice and flat when we come to stitch that from the front here. And if you were trying to do the same with this one, you can see that it's just going to just not sit straight for you and not sit flat for you underneath your foot. So do make sure you press them. Okay, and once that's pressed, we are then going to, you've guessed it, we're going to top stitch. And we're just going to do one line of top stitching. So in this case, I am going to line up my presser foot there, and I'm going to move my needle across to the right to make it a little bit easier. So I want it to go onto the 1/4 of an inch, but I want my presser foot here just to be able to hold on to that fabric so it guides it through. So I've actually moved my needle across to the 6.5 position on my machine, which is a Dressmaking. And I'm just going to go forwards. Oh, it's starting to jump. Take it steady over that little bit of top stitching you've already done. So I've got a little bit of a hump there you've got to get over. And just reverse just to start and stop. And there we've got our little hem done. We've got our 2 hems on the bottom of the 2 legs. Okay, so that's the next stage. So the next bit is the exciting bit, because what we're going to do is we're going to actually start to make these look like a pair of trousers, because up till now they've not really looked very much like a pair of trousers. But what I want you to do is, with the pocket on the inside, is I want you to match, and on the hem that you've just sewn, I want you to match those 2 edges together so that we're going to get a leg. And we're also going to match it, I'll take off my overlocking, we're going to match it at this under leg seam as well. So we always match at our start and end point first. That's where we're going to finish. We'll start whichever way round we end up doing it, and this is our other piece of our leg. Okay, so this is what we've got here, and then I'm going to just match that seam together, because this is a bias edge and sometimes they can stretch, so if you get a little bit where it's a little bit extra, just remember what I always say and split the difference. So go into the middle first, and then if you need to, you can put another pin further down just to hold that. Smoosh your fibres together. It just means that when I've put it through the overlock, it's just stretched it slightly. But just smoosh your fibres together and they should lie flat. Because we cut it out and the pattern's matched up properly, then that's all we need to do. Okay, so we've got a seam along there that we're going to sew. So let's just do the other one as well. So here we are, we've got our pattern piece here with our pocket, and literally we're just going to enclose that pocket on the inside by folding it over. So we've got the hem here, and then we've got our bits here. Just take off those extra threads that I've got that you might not have. And we're just going to match that point up there that's going to fit between the legs. And then again into the middle, match those 2 pieces, making sure that the fabric lengths are equal either side. And then another one here, and another one over here. Okay, and now using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, we're just going to stitch all the way along here. So I'm just going to come the other side of these overlocking threads on mine. And we're just going to reverse start a couple of stitches, reverse, taking our pins out so we don't sew over our pins. Pin the stitches, take out this pin. So I'm going to go that way to about there. And then it just goes straighter just further down, doesn't it? I'm just going to go forward and back at the bottom here, because this is going to get some hammer that seam is from people trying to put the trousers on and off. So cut your threads, neaten it up as we go along, and then let's do the other side here. Okay, so what you should end up with this point is you should have a pocket on this bit here. And if you put those together, so we've got our mirrored copies again, we've got a pocket, we can see the stitching for the pocket and the stitching for that there. So the next bit is can seem complicated. It's not, it's straightforward. So but it can feel complicated when you're trying to read instructions. What we're going to do now is going to turn one of the legs, and I'm going to use this right hand side one, round the other way. So let's just turn that inside out. Okay, not inside out, it's the right way around, isn't it? And then what we're going to do now is matching our notches at the back here. So we've got 2 notches here and 2 notches here on our pieces. We're going to fit this leg that's the right way round inside the leg that's the wrong way round. So just tuck it in, feed it all the way down to the bottom. Just go in through the hem and just get hold of it and pull it through. And what I want you to do first of all, before you do anything else, is just open up this seam allowance here, the seam that we've just done, which is the under legs, the inside leg seam allowance. Open that out. Oops, mine doesn't want to open out. There we go. And match up those 2 stitching lines, because that's a crucial match point. So just open it up, and you can see, I mean, you might not be able to see, but there's a stitch line there and a line there. And I'm just going to roll those together until they're at the edge. And I'm just going to put a pin in to hold that together. You can use clips if you want to. If you've got some of these clips here, this is a good place to use those if you prefer. Just make sure your seam allowance is lying flat and that seam is together. Okay, so one leg's inside the other. Then what we're going to do now is we're going to match up these 2 notches here with those 2 notches there for the back. And we're going, you guessed it, we're going to put another clip on there. So that's holding those in together. And then we're going to match at the top here as well. Let me just take these extra threads off. Apologies, I should have taken those all off at the start, shouldn't I? Right. So again, this is the narrow side of the strap position in the back of the things. We're going to put those 2 together as well. So we've got all the way down here, around this curve here. Now we're going to do the other side. So now we're going to find our notch here, a single notch there and there. Put those 2 together. And we're going to put a clip on or a pin. And then we're going to follow up this straight side here and match them at the top again and put another pin. All right, okay. So that's what it looks like. You've got one leg inside the other. We can look at the hems and we can see that those legs are in together. Our seam allowance is pressed open, just even if it's finger pressed, just to hold that together. Hold that there. And we've matched our notches, the 2 notches at the back and the 1 notch at the front. And what we're going to do now is we're going to start here at this thick end, and we're going to stitch all the way down, all the way around this curve here, and then all the way up the back up the other side. Okay, let's do that again. We're going to start and stop here, all the way down here and round and back the other side. To get your orientation, make sure it's right. If you just match your notches, you've got that right, but also if you have a little sneaky peek inside, your 2 back pockets should be facing each other and lying on top of each other. Okay, so let's then just sort this out. So again, I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to go forwards and backwards when I start, and I'm lining the edge of my presser foot up with my work. Now, because we're going to be going round a curve, always make sure that you've got your needle down in your work when you stop. And you can hear my bobbin rattling. I'm hoping I've got enough. I think I'm playing bobbin chicken with this one. So as you start to go around your curve, take a few stitches, but try and so far you can move your fabric so that you can go round the corner. But if it starts to get a bit steep, because it will do, keep your needle in your work and do that pivot motion again where you lift up your presser foot. And then you just move your feet, you just move your fabric. Even moving it just a couple of millimetres will actually give you a lot more room to work with. I'm going to take this one out now. Make sure your seam allowances stay flat. So just onto that one, and then we can straighten out the, so as you go you're just going to be straightening out the, oh, I've got my hands in the way, sorry. So you're going to be straightening out your fabric as you go, because you want it to be flat underneath where your needle's going to go. So just keep taking your time. You can see our tailor's tacks there, just marking the way. And then we're going to start at the same place. Okay, and take our work out. Okay. So that's what we've got now. So we've just sewn all the way down along here. Now before I go any further, I'm just going to take out my tailor's tacks because we don't need those now. So we've matched up our front and our back. Just be careful not to pull any of the threads on your fabric. And use a quick unpick if you prefer. They should just come straight out. As I say, if they don't, it means you've just sewn through it. And if you sew through them, they just need to be snipped off short on one side. Don't pull them too hard because you will pull your stitches out. Yes, that you've just sewn. So they've all come out okay. Okay, now the magic happens, because what we're going to do now is we are going to pull on one leg, on the other leg, and it's going to pull them out and pull them around the right way. So just keep pulling on that leg and unfold it. And as you will see, we have now got a pair of trousers. There's the front of our trousers. And there's the back of our trousers with our nicely matched pockets. And there's the bit that goes between the legs. So what I want you to do now is, once you get to that stage, is just take it to the ironing board and just press open this seam as far as you can go in the centre seam down to the front, down the front, and also down the back just here. Also, you can just take your trousers and you can just press that inseam seam open as well, just to lie flat. Okay, so let's do that bit. So next I want you to take your little square pocket, and we're going to do this pretty much the same way as we did the others. So let's take our pins out. Now remember which side is right and wrong. So the top side for me is right, if I remember correctly from how I placed my pattern. And what we're going to do now is we're going to fold. I'm going to find our notches. I've got my notch on the side, the one there and one there, and I know that's my fold line. I'm going to fold that over this way, and then I'm going to fold that little top bit back. So this is the same effect as what we're going to do as we did before. I'm just going to finger press that for now so I can show you again. So this is the top of our fabric here, and I've folded at the notch point the edge completely over to cover onto the right side of the fabric, and then this seam allowance here, I've just folded it in half again, and I've just pushed it to the back. So I'm just going to put a little pin. It just highlights where the edges are, but your notch point is your reference point. So just put pins in either side there. And what I'm going to do now is do the same as I did before. I'm going to use the edge of my foot as a reference, and I'm going to sew over here backwards and go backwards and start again. Then do a reference line down to this corner, across to here, and then back up here, and then start and stop again. This is my theory. I think I have enough thread to do that on my bobbin. Okay. Hold on to your thread so that it will help pull your fabric through your machine if you need it to. Take this pin out now that that's on the work. Just use that thread, it'll just pull it through for you. That'll do, I think. And twist it round. as long as it's consistent and straight. Take your time, make sure it doesn't get folded up underneath your presser foot. One more stitch, I think. That's it. Press the foot up, twist the work round again, and then we're going to go back up the other side. Make sure your pin's out the way, otherwise it will skew your stitches. So I get to about there, and then I need to take this pin out. And then we're going to go over that fold, and then we're going to just reverse, hold that in place. Take our threads off. So this is what we ended up with. So this is the right side of my pocket. We've got the little flap there. I'm going to snip off these corners again, like we did before, to get rid of the bulk. That's just folded over slightly, so I'll just take rid of that. And again this side here. And then we're going to use, I've got my seam gauge here. Just got a nice little corner for turning. I'm just going to fold those corners back and push them out. That's one side there. Oh, I've got a pink thread on there by mistake. And again here. So I'm going to push that out. Okay, so then what we're going to do now is, as we did before, find the line of the stitching line and just use our fingernails to just finger press that down on the other side. Just gives us a really good reference point. And then we're going to fold these corners in here as well, along that bottom edge. Now with these corners here, because we've got a bit of bulk and we don't want to show, what we can do is, if you fold that bit in first onto where the threads meet, and then fold your corners in, when you press it, you actually get a nice little mitered edge on the corner there, especially if you fiddle around with it a little bit. But what that means is that you've not got, if I try and show on this one, when I fold that over, you might have a little tick, a little ear sticking out. And it can be a bit fiddly sometimes, because that's wanting to stitch, get my words right, it's wanting to stick out on this edge because you've got a straight line there and a straight line there. And as you do that, if you can see, you can get a little bit of a fraying edge just on the edge just here. So what I do on mine, let me show you again, is where this corner is, I fold the corner over diagonally to this point here, to where that stitching point is, the corner is. So fold that so that your stitching line's just right on the edge. Finger press it so it's at right angles, so it's just across. And then you can fold in that line there on the stitching line, and then you can fold in that line on the stitching line as well. And can you see all your raw edges are in the centre here, they're away from the edge of your pocket, so when you actually go to sew that down it'll be far neater. So again, let's do this one now. So we're going to fold that corner, fold this corner here into the stitching line, just press it with our fingers. The heat of your fingers will on cottons will just hold it in place. Take that thread away for you. Fold that into that stitching line, finger press, and fold that line in there, finger press. Make sure you get a little bit of a point at your corner, finger press it. And then if I go and press this with the iron now, that should all lie flat for us for when we want to come and stitch that down. So let me just go and iron that and I'll be back to you. So if I just show you now that that's ironed, that's all in place there. Okay. So what Sarah then says now is that we are going to, first of all, we're going to top stitch on this edge, because we can't top stitch once that's on the garment. So I'm just going to pop that on. I'm just going to move my needle position again. You hold on to my threads on the back to make sure that this doesn't twist. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, we've got our pocket with our little edge top stitch on this top edge here. We're just going to fold it in half to give us a reference point. So just finger press that just in half. Okay, so that gives us that edge, because that we want to line up with the front seam of our trousers. That'll make sure that that stays nice and flat. Now it doesn't need to be too far down. This one here is just under 1 inch down from the top. If I just show you on there. And you can decide for yourself where you want yours to be. So I'm just going to pin that on place there and make sure that the fold on the bottom here is on line with the centre seam just here. That'll make sure that the pocket's nice and straight for us. Again, I'm putting the tops of my pins into the middle of my pocket and leaving the edges free. And now that I've got that in position, I'm going to put pins to the corners. I find that that anchors it down the best way. Just making sure that all your seam allowances are staying in on your pocket. They should do if you've pressed it. I always use a little bit of steam as well. So I'm going to take out the top pin because I don't need that one now, because we're not going to stitch on this top edge here because we want that to be able to put things in. And then what we're going to do is start here with the pin out of the way slightly. And we're going to top stitch down this edge here, stop and pivot there, across the bottom here, stop and pivot, and then back up here. And we're just going to reinforce that bit just there. So just make sure that when you do this that you've got your back flap of your dungarees out of the way, because it'd be very easy to get that tucked in and to be out and to get underneath your stitching, and then you're going to have to get your unpicker out. So again, let's just match this up here. Threads there in case it starts to get a bit tangled. Turn my speed down a little bit. Pins in the way. Let me just move that pin out of the way before we start stitching. We don't want any broken pins. So a couple of stitches just to hold it and reverse. Making sure it's nice and flat, and you've got your back flap out of the way. Just going down this edge here. Leave your needle in your work so you can start to manipulate your pins if they're in the way. Down to the corner edge, needle up, foot up. Again, making sure everything's out of the way and that your seam allowance on the back here is opened. Foot down again. Take it steady whilst you work off your corners because they are a little bit bulky, and take your pins out as you go. Foot up and pivot round again, and then foot down. Take it steady on your corners, make sure they're nicely anchored down. And on this pin here, so I'll take that one out. And then I'm going to reverse at the top here to reinforce that. Needle up, press the foot up. And then again we can pull these threads through if we wanted to, or you can just snip them off if you want to. It's a purely personal choice. I tend to do 50-50, it depends. That one doesn't want to come, but this one will. I never know how much detail to include, folks. So you'll have to let me know, and I suppose it might vary from person to person. But don't forget, on the settings you can also speed me up. So if you're an experienced sewist and you already know what you're doing and you just want a bit of a guide, put me on to double speed or 1.5 times speed. You'll see all of the main points that I'm making, and you can always stop me and then play it at normal speed if you want to. If it gets to an interesting part, if there are any interesting parts. Hopefully there are for you. Hopefully I teach you something that you didn't know already. That's always a nice thing to know if I've done that. But most of you probably know all of this already. But as I say, it's just the construction. But I just find that it's useful. And as I say, Pauline did ask me for this video. So hopefully Pauline is finding it very useful. So there we've got our pocket on. Now what Sarah does is she actually makes a pencil line. So in order to do that, what we actually do is make sure that the back of the dungarees are still out of the way, because if they're folded up here and you start stitching, you're going to stitch through and then you're going to have to undo it. So tuck that out the way. And then what she does here is on this side here, she just makes another little row of stitching down. So stop and start here and go down and then stop and start here. And that just makes a little pencil pocket. I often do this in bags as well when I'm making bags for myself. It's quite useful to have a little pen pocket because they do tend to slip around. So again, forward and back. And I'm just going to use the edge of my presser foot with the edge of the pocket, and that will give me enough, making sure that I've got my back bit out of the way, nice and straight, just down, and then reverse back, and take that off. So again, snip those threads off. I've got a little pencil pocket, as you can see. I'll not use that, use this instead, and that's a little pencil pocket there, just in there. So let's just pull this thread through again, and then we can knot it off. That one doesn't want to go, this one will. Sometimes it depends where, because ones you're starting and stopping, you tend to go over the top of it, so. Hopefully this is just in time for Easter as well. Getting some clothes ready for Luna. Or for Freddie in this case, I suppose, but Luna can wear overalls as well, can't she? She might be doing the decorating, or it might be Alfie as well. They might be working in their workshop, in the garage. Who knows what these little dolls get up to. But at least they can do it with some very stylish threads on. Okay. So, pocket with our pencil thing, all nice and neat, all lovely corners. Now I can see a little bit of stitching on this edge here from my guide stitching from when I've ironed it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take those few stitches out because I don't want to see them. They serve no purpose in terms of the actual construction other than to be a guideline. So being very careful not to spoil our edges and our fabric. Just take that out. Okay, that's neater. Okay, I'm happy with that. Let's move on. So the next bit we're going to work on now is the actual yoke of the dungarees, and these fit inside the front. So we've got our pattern piece, we can take that off. We marked our centre front with a little snip. Yep. And I marked the centre as well with a little tailor tack because of overlocking them. And we've also marked the front, so we've got a mirror copy of these two. So we've got the thick bit at the back and the thin bit into the middle. Take off my threads. Right, okay, and we've got our pins on the right side of our fabric, so we know which is the right side of our fabric. And what Sarah wants you to do now is she wants you to put one on top of the other, so the two right sides are together. And we've got the thick bit here together at the front, and then we've got this little bit here. And what we're going to do is match the top edges here with that's a bent pin, we don't want to use a bent pin. And we're going to match the bottom here to make it nice and neat. And I have just overlocked this bottom edge. Okay, and then we're also, now that we've got the right sides together, we can use these pins from the inside and take those out. And what I'm going to do now is match up this seam here as well. So we're actually making this into like a circle. I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. So we've got the two right sides together. And we've pinned this edge here, and we've pinned this edge here. And when we open it up, that makes like a circle bit here. Okay, so let's just go to our machine and sew that down. Doesn't matter which side you start on, but you want it to be the same seam allowance that you had when you were doing the centre seams on your dungarees, because this is where it's going to be important. But if it's not quite right, I'll show you how to make it right. Reverse sew at the top of the bottom. that off. Up those edges. Now, because I haven't overlocked these edges, I'm just going to use my pinking shears, and that will help. I'm just taking off a smidge just to put that zigzag side in, because that will help that and stop that from fraying. So it's the same pinking shears that I use for going around the head as well. You see that zigzag edge. And what we're going to do now is we are going to press this seam open. So we can do it first with our fingers. And then what I want to do first, before I do anything else, is I'm just going to offer it up. So turn it round so that keep it the same way, but we're going to take the thick end and put that over where the big pocket is, and just make sure that that's big enough to fit. So let's tuck the dungarees, the dungarees inside the yoke, because I want to check these. It's just going to fit before I do anything else. Let's just put a pin in there. Match up the back piece as well. So my seam allowance on the back piece was slightly wider than this one. Just see what impact that has, because I can go back at this stage and I can make it tighter. No, that's going to fit okay. Okay, now I'm happy with that. So what I've done is I've just put a pin at the top and the front, and I've just made sure that when I match these edges together here, going round, that they all line up quite nicely. So we have got a little notch on the side here, which is going to match in with the side seam on our dungarees, and that matches nicely there across the top. So it's just that bit there. So the right side of my thin bit isn't the same side. I can always go and just redo a bit of that seam allowance and just take it in slightly, make the seam allowance a little bit bigger. Or for me, I'm just going to make sure that I just follow one edge on the right side, and then I should be fine. So let's unpin this now, because we don't need it to be pinned on just yet. We're not finished with our straps yet. I'm going to take that off. Okay. So yes, I am going to now just go and iron these two seams open. The thing we're going to do is we're going to work on our strap. So if you take your pins out of your strap, of your pattern piece, there's no markings on here. And the top side, closest to my pattern, is the right side for me. So what she wants you to do first, let's do it in stages. First of all, just fold in these 1/4 inch edges and press them. Okay, so we've got our 1/4 inch folded edges in. Now what she wants you to do is fold over to enclose those 1/4 inch edges so that the two folded edges match up, and then press it again. So let's just do that. So we have our strap like this, a bit like making bias binding if you make your own bias binding. So we've got all the raw edges are going to be enclosed. But the next stage she wants you to do now is she wants you to open this up on the ends and fold it back the other way, because she wants you just to neaten off both ends of these. Okay, so we've taken our folded edge, so we folded the 2/4 inch seams into the middle, and then folded it again in half, so that when we look at it, all of the raw edges are enclosed apart from on the ends, and we've pressed it again like that, so we've got a nice long strip. Then what we're doing is we're now opening this up flat again and folding it counter to the way that we just pressed it, and we're just going to go across here, and all that's going to do is just neaten these edges off. That's all we want to do. Oops. So holding on to your threads at the back. Now look how that's wanted to fold up, look. Where's my oil? Just press it down so the tip stays down. Snip the threads. And then we're going to do that for the other side as well. If you find that your work keeps bunching up under your sewing machine, what you can do is start in the middle. Okay, so give your press a foot more to hold on to, because we're going to go backwards and forwards anyway. So go backwards. So again here, I'm anchoring it down with my finger here, and then I'm just pushing down on the thread, on the fabric to hold it down, so I can then put my presser foot back down again. Just holds it in place. Just a little tip. And then what we're going to do now is we're just going to turn this round the other way. So we're just going to then fold this back round the other way. Where's my seam gauge? Just to press that through, because that's going to give us a nice neat edge. Again, you've got these little bits pushing out, so just make sure you try and get as much in as you can of those raw bits. And then again on the other side as well, let's push that in there. Okay, because these things are so fiddly to turn round, this is how she's doing it so that you can keep it in line. And then what we're then going to do is we're going to edge stitch all the way around this now. Now I'm going to start in the centre down here, because we're going to fold these in half in the end and cut them in half. So I'm going to start at that halfway point, because you won't see where we've started and stopped them. That's about there. I'm going to move my needle across again in my stitch so that I've got it on the edge, so that my presser foot is holding on to everything. And I'm just going to make sure that everything's lined up. Now the end is going to be bulky, so just be careful. Use an awl if you need to, just to help it through. Just make sure you don't hit it with the end of your sewing machine. Let's pivot. Pivot again. Take your time, there's no rush. Threads. Okay, so that's what we've done with that. Okay, so now Sarah, I want you to get those into half, and now snip that in half. So we've now got two straps. You can choose which side you prefer. I've got a side that I prefer. And now what she wants you to do is, if you find the back of your dungarees here, you're going to have one piece of the strap going here. Now I would suggest that you poke it through a little bit and you do it at an angle, so they're almost like they're crossing over slightly. So there's the back, that's the thin bit, that's the front bit with your pocket on, so you want the back bit where the back pockets are. And you're going to take a strap. Now remember that when you flick these over, the bit that's lying against your dungarees is going to be the bit that you're going to see. So if you've got a right side and a wrong side, or one that you prefer, then just make sure you get them the right way around. And I would just pull them up a little bit, just so they're poking out the top. And then what I'm going to do But can you see that this strap here, the left strap is pointing towards the right pocket? I'm going to put a pin in the middle. And then I'm going to take the other strap that we've got, choose which side I want, and I like that side better. So have the side that you like lying against your dungarees. And this time, the right strap is going to point towards the left pocket. And just have it a little bit, make sure they're even. And then you can probably use the same pin actually. So you've only got one, not to get in the way, and they're going to hold those together. Because what we want is that is going to poke out when we put the yoke on. So as we did before, we put the yoke on, didn't we? So we're going to have our narrow bit of the yoke, there's the full bit, and we're going to poke the dungarees inside the circle that we've made of the yoke. And then we're going to match this so that the centre seam of this yoke lining, fits on the edge there. I'm going to leave the pin in place for the straps, so just pull it back so you're not going to sew over the point of it. Another pin just here. Then I'm going to turn my dungarees around to the front, and we're now going to match up this centre front seam. So we've got a centre front seam there, that's going to match on there perfectly. And we're going to put a pin either side of that. Now actually, let me just move these pins because I'm going to sew from the inside because I can follow the lining better. So I'm just going to put the pins on the inside. Sorry about that, I put those on the outside to start off with. Oops, that's not holding it. Okay, so the pins are on the inside. And then where I got the little notch on the side seam, that's going to match the centre of your side seam here, where you did, not your side seam, where you did your top stitching. So again, we're going to have a little pin through there. So these are your reference points, aren't they? These are your clues to make sure that you've got it in the right place. And get another one here. Once we've got those main bits in place, we can then ease this yoke. And this yoke, if you've used the same seam allowance, should sit really smoothly against your dungarees. And again, we're just lining these curved edges up here now. And this is just where you can see there's a slight difference on the seam allowance, but it's not going to make any difference as long as I make it equal like both sides, so that it's not lopsided. We should be fine. Lots of pins. Of course, you can use clips, and if you've got a child sewing with you, I would strongly recommend you invest in some clips because they'll save any problems. Excuse the burn marks on my fingers. You know what it's like cooking. Right, so that's where we are now. So we have our yoke on the outside, dungarees on the inside. We've opened up all of our seam allowances, and we've got our dungarees now ready to be sewn. So what I'm going to do now is move things out the way, get myself positioned so that you can see what I'm doing. Okay, let's see if we can do this, hopefully without my hands being in the way. So I want to move my needle back to the right position. Start and stop. Keep my needle anchored down into my work, and then as I come to my pins, I'm just going to move them out of the way. And I'm just going to move the dungarees so that the bit in front of where I'm going to be sewing is smooth. Take out your pins as you go. As you can see, this is where you could get stabbed with your pins, so just be careful. And always just make sure, just tuck your work under. Just use your fingers to make sure it's nice and smooth and you've got no puckers underneath there. Just do a little bit at a time and then just stop and then just reposition yourself. I'm quite close to my phone, so apologies if I'm shouting and if you can hear this a bit too loud, I'll try and be a bit quieter. Again, not a time for rushing. These little garments are quite fiddly. So when we go over the straps, it's going to be quite thick. So again, let's leave our needle in our work. Let's pivot to turn across and take this first pin out. Do a few stitches. I can take out the second pin as well. And just be careful because we have got that pin holding the straps in place. And I'm just going to go backwards and forwards because that could be a potential pull point if for any child who's receiving these as a gift. And down the other side. So I just need to make sure that I'm not going too close to the edge. Oh, nearly got the needle end of my pin then. So again, just flatten them out, just adjust as you go. Can you hear me concentrating? And then we're going to go across this top bit here as well because it's all, so make sure that our edges are all together, and they are. So pin down, needle down, and then I'm just going to go across the top here. Make sure you see my allowances are staying nice and flat. And then what you want to make sure is you're not going to get a pucker at the end here. So if you are, just stop at this point and just even this out to make sure you're not going to get a pucker along the top, because that will show on your finished garment. Just reverse and stop. Take our threads out, work out. And this is what we've got. Oh, I did sew over one pin, apologies. I didn't realise that one was still in there. So what we've got is, this is our yoke. If we look from the outside of the yoke, we went across the straps, down under this arm, around to the front here. Get those threads off for you. Across the top of the bib, and then down the other side as well. Now we're finished with these tailor's tacks, we can just pull those out. Don't need those anymore, they were just marking the side seams for us. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to clip the curve. Now, clipping the curve is something that you'll hear people talk about, and it is actually really important, because if we just try it without clipping the curve, we can see that this is going to be a little bit bulky when it tries to lie flat. It doesn't want to lie as flat as possible. But if we just pull this back around the other side so I can show you, we'll take that pin out as well. Now that was just holding the straps in place, wasn't it? Take these pins out, and then what we're going to do is use our snips, and we're going to just do some little snips at right angles to our stitching line on any of the curved edges. So like here, it won't make it fray, so don't worry, because I used to worry about that when I was first sewing, but it doesn't. So I'm just going up to, not quite up to, but 3 or 4 threads away from my stitches, but it just releases the pressure on this seam. And this is why I like using snips, because I don't ever put them in right the way there, because you run the risk of snipping too hard or getting nudged and you're going to stitch into there. Just use the points and just go up, and that way you can never go into your into your garment. About every centimetre and a half, just on the curved edges. We don't need to do this top bit here, although we will take some bulk out of the side. But let's do our snipping first. Onto the other side. And again, we're just going to do those snips. Okay, so here we go to here. I'm just going to take off some of this bulk. Not taking all of it off because we want to keep some of it because we need to hold on to it. But on these corners here, I'll take off a bit where we're going to fold it through. Just take some of that bulk out. And when you've got seam allowances like this, you can also just snip off at right angles towards the edge of the seam. Okay, like that, so it just takes off that bulk as well. And you'll be surprised how much flatter that makes your seam sit. I'll do this on dressmaking too. And again here we've got a lot of bulk in the back with these straps, so that's a good place to take off some of this bulk if we can do. Again, seam allowance here. Doesn't look like a lot, but actually it just helps a little, it just helps it all sit flatter. So we've got our curves clipped, we've got our corners clipped, we've got our seam allowances clipped. Now's the time to reveal and to turn it through. So let's pull on our dungarees here. Okay, so they have crossed over, which is fine, because that's going to go to one shoulder and that's going to go to the other. This here is all going to all lie lovely and flat. So we'll push out our corners here again. Just use whatever you use, whether it's the end of a knitting needle or your seam gauge or something, just something that's not going to make a hole in your dungarees. You don't want at this stage now when you're nearly finished to poke a hole through. And if you need to, you can use a pin very carefully, because you will pull the threads through if you're not careful, to just ease out those corners just to make sure that they're nice and lying nice and flat. Okay, and then again we're just finger pressing these edges down just to make sure that they're sitting flat. Look how much nicer that curve sits now that you've actually finger pressed it. And then what Sarah wants you to do now is we're going to choose a place, and I would suggest under the arm here, and we're just going to go around and top stitch just on the edge, just holding all of this together. Little thread sticking out there. Let's just get rid of that while we're here. We're nearly done, folks. Well done if you've stuck with me for this far. Okay, so we're going to start here and then I'm going to edge stitch round. So to do this, I'm going to take off this part of my sewing machine, because what you can do sometimes is actually put your work over the edge. It'll fit on mine. If it doesn't on yours, don't worry. What I'm going to do is, do you know what I'd suggest you do first? We'll press it first, because that'll make sure that it all stays under. So let me just go and press it. Okay, back again. So we've pressed this now, sitting much nicer. So let's pop this on here. I'm just going to top stitch. So I'm going to start and stop. And then just keeping really close to the edge. Oh, I don't want to turn very well. Maybe not have it on the edge there. It's not twisting very well. I've definitely got the top of my dungarees at the top anyway, so because that's the side I want to look really nice. Down to the edge down here. Across the back just here. This is a thick bit, so just take your time. If your machine struggles, just use your hand to hand crank your stitches rather than use your foot pedal. Stop every now and again and just rearrange your work. I'm hoping you can, oh, don't know, you can see. I moved my hand, sorry. It's difficult when you can't see the screen. Right, take your time on this bit because of it being a thick corner, it might not go through very easily, so I've got my all ready just in case I need it. Just take your time. That's gone through okay. Close to the edge there, but just take your time. So there again, we can pull our threads through if we want to. Pull it through. Now this time I've got a different finishing I'm going to suggest for that one. So let's just pull this one through if it'll let us. Yes, it does. Okay. So what I do with these types of edges when it's on a decorative edge like this, sorts of put those bits out of the way, is I just thread my needle with the thread end. Just wetting it slightly does just help. And then what I do is I feed it with the needle, feed it back in where it came out almost, and just along this edge here. Yeah, so it just goes along a little way, and then I just give it a little tug and it just pulls that thread in. If you just pull on the thread slightly when you snip, it'll just fall back into your seam that you've just covered. Oops, right way around. There we go. And again, just thread that in close to where it came out and just go along that seam a bit. Just anchors those threads, it just stops things from coming out and getting untidy. Obviously you can just snip them off if you want to, absolutely no problem at all. Just take a few little minutes more, but for me, I just like the finish. Again, into the edge. And I'm just going through, I'm not going through to the right side, I'm just going along that folded edge. Little tug. It pulls that stitch back down into the work. Okay, so let's see where we are, shall we? We have, oh, can't get my needle out of the way. So we have a finished pair of dungarees. Well, the main body of the dungarees are done anyway. There's our two edges which will come over the Freddie's shoulders and will fit onto here. They just need a press because I've got pressed under thing. They have crossed over, but by crossing over the straps, you actually avoid getting the strap caught in this seam bit here when you're sewing the yoke onto the main part of the dungarees. I don't know whether they're supposed to do that on the actual ones, but that's definitely the way that I do. I quite like that they cross over. And then you can either sew a popper. What does Sarah say to do? She says sew a metal button onto the top of each side seam. So she suggests put a little button here, and she also says to sew a press stud underneath each button and sew in place. Let's have a look. So here she says sew a metal button onto the top of each side seam, which is here. Sew a button onto the top, each of the top corners of the front bib at the top here. Position one side of a press stud underneath each button and sew in place, then sew the other half onto each strap. It is worth putting the dungarees onto your badger to check the length of the straps first before attaching, but this is what she's suggesting to do. So I've got some little buttons here. See if I've got enough to do what we need to do. Oh, I've got 4 of these little black ones. We could use those, couldn't we? I think I bought those as possible eyes, but they'll do for this, won't they? 1, 2, oops, 3, 4. So these are little tiny buttons, so what you can do is, probably need to be a little bit bigger really, but you can sew them onto the top there, okay, for decorative purposes. And then if you've got some press studs, then you can sew those onto the ends here and sew those under there. Okay, so let me just go and get mine and I get that sorted, and then we'll see where we are from there. Okay, so I've changed my mind against these little black buttons, and instead I'm going to use these wooden ones that I've got. They're a little bit bigger, but I think they're going to suit the dimensions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little stitch underneath here to hide those ends, hide my knot, and just snip through those threads to get those off. And then I just do a little stitch in place, just anchors that down, and then I'm going to sew my button on through here. So that's just going to hold that. I'm making sure that my two holes for my button are straight across from each other. Just feeling for the holes with the needle. Don't know about you, but my needles tend to get a little bit of a bend in the middle of them. As long as I can guess where I'm going, then all's good. Oops. Now you might want to leave the buttons off if you're giving this for a small child, because they can be a choking risk. So just be aware of what the safety regulations are wherever you live in the world. This one's just for decorative purposes, so it's not going to a small child. So I'm just going to carry on. So that's one just there. So just do a few stitches in place on the other side. Oops, keeps getting caught. And that should anchor that down, making sure I'm on screen for you. Yeah. And then what I do is when I'm finishing it off is when I've done my last stitch is I actually just carry my thread down on the inside a little bit. So I'm not going through the front, just going through to the yoke at the back, and then I bring it out on a side seam. So you're just going in by the edge of the button, coming out on the side seam, you can't see it on the front, and then when you pull your thread again, give it a little tug, and when you snip it off, it'll just pull it back inside, but it just buries your thread inside. So let's do this on the other side as well. Do my little knot. Stop my little ends off so I don't get in the way. Little stitch in place just to anchor that on. Make sure you've got a nice even looking button in terms of colour, because some of these are quite a little bit natural, aren't they, so they can vary slightly. And then I've got that one with the top edge there and the side edge there, and then with my holes for my button straight across. That's what I'm doing here now as well. Oh, careful not to stab my finger. Just straighten it up. Looks nice. Just hold it in place. So I hope you've enjoyed this little sew along in terms of dungarees. Pauline, I hope it helps you as well. I know that you're the one who requested this. I hope I've covered all of the points that you needed. I've tried to be as clear as I can do, which does make my videos much longer than you might find other ones, but I'm hopeful that the amount of detail that I managed to capture for you is really helpful. So it's perhaps something you pop on while you're watching doing something else, or have it on there. So that's those two there. So let's just put a couple of stitches on the back here. So I want to say thank you to Pauline for asking me to make the dungarees. I had got it in mind to do a video anyway, so I just hopped on to do these, so hopefully that's been helpful. If you are a subscriber, then I really appreciate it, so do consider hitting the subscribe button, because you don't have to watch everything I do, but at least you know when I've got a new video out. And for me, it is good for the YouTube algorithm. It means that people know that my videos are popular, which hopefully they are. But also it means that I know who's watching and that you like what I've done. Also consider leaving a comment if you don't mind down below, because that also helps the algorithm and it pushes my videos out to more people then. So more people get to share in the Luna love. I also do dressmaking as well, as you know, and cross stitch. So if you've seen I'm multidisciplinary, so I enjoy doing all sorts of stitching. Needle and thread is where I'm at. I do embroidery as well. So there's all sorts of things that I will have on my channel that may interest you, may not, but hopefully you'll stick around for other videos like these with Luna. I will be making some more clothes as time goes on, because I do enjoy dressing them, and also I'm hoping to build up a wardrobe for my granddaughter Clementine for her Luna for when she's older. She's only 7 months old at the moment, so when she gets to be 3, then hopefully that'll be a nice little wardrobe already made for her Luna. So let's pop this couple of stitches in place just to hold those threads together. And then again, I'm just going to put that needle through out to a side seam, making sure it doesn't come around to the front too soon. Yep, I'm happy with that. Pull it through. The next thing that I'm going to do with this one is I am going to, oops, well that didn't go very well, did it? One more button to do. And then what I'm also going to do then is going to sew the press studs on to the back here. So I'll come back when I've done that, because you don't need to see me do that, I don't think. Okay, and I'll be back in a minute. Just in case anybody's not familiar with press studs, or my terminology of press studs, that's what we call them in the UK. Although I'm in Spain at the moment, but I am from the UK. This is what they are. They're just these 2-piece little snap fasteners, and they literally do just push onto each other and snap shut. You could use poppers if you wanted to as well, like cam snaps I think they're called in the States. So again, depends on where you're watching, but this is what these little press studs are like, so that you can use these. And one side is going to go onto the back of here. Whoops, that's one gone. One's going to go onto the back just here like that, and then the other one will then go on the edge of the strap like that, so that when you bring those two edges together they will just fasten shut. So the button on the outside is purely for decorative reasons, and the actual fastening is done by your press studs. So just to finish, I'll give you a little view of our completed dungarees. This is on my Luna Lapin. I did forget to leave a hole for a tail. I mean, that's easy enough to do. Just leave a gap in the seam at the back here. You can just start and stop just to reinforce wherever you think they're going to be, and then just leave a gap, and the seam allowance will just sit to one side and you can poke a tail through. So I have forgotten to do that, so it's a little bit bumpy on the bottom there. But otherwise, yeah, she's looking good. We've got the press studs and the fasteners here for her snap straps. They're fairly strong. I think that's what I would do. I think I put a note in the video, is I would make these a little bit longer. I think they're just a little bit on the snug side on her shoulders, but again, that's not too much of a problem. And the other thing is, if your Luna's going to be sitting down wearing her dungarees all the time, you might want to just add a little bit of length to the legs, because as I say, as when she's standing up, it's fine and her legs are the right length, but then as she sits down, they're just pulled up, and you might want to make them a bit shorter. So there's our completed dungarees. I really hope you've enjoyed this sew along. I'm sorry it's so long. Hopefully you've just realised that you can stop and start and come back to it whenever you want to. I did consider making it in 2 parts, but I don't know, I just thought it was easier and neater just to keep it all together. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like me to have a go at making some of the other clothes, then just drop me a line and I will look at adding it onto my list of things that I want to do. Hit the subscribe button if you don't mind. That'd be really, really good for me and hopefully for you too. And I will look forward to you joining me on another day, and we'll get some more clothes sewn for our our Luna Lapin or Freddie or the other characters' wardrobes. So have a great day everybody, and I will hope to see you soon.